Designs by Diane. Today we're going to work on this medallion and star quilt. Come along and let's get busy quilting. Here's the pattern that I've designed for today. It is a large Dresden plate, and we're going to have 36 spokes to our plate, or 36 wedges to our plate. We're going to mount this on a backing material and then have squares of all of the colors to go around it on the edges, and then have an outside border and then bind it. This quilt will be just under 60 inches square. If you want to make it larger, you could put a bigger background piece behind it or do some other blocks around it and then bind it. We're going to make the plate, then put the center on the plate, this little round area here to cover the hole. Then we will mount that, applique it to the background square, and then continue with the rest of our quilt. We're going to need a few special tools, so we'll talk about those next. One of the first tools I want to talk about is this wedge ruler. It is a large wedge. It's 25 inches long, I believe it is. It is a 10-degree wedge, meaning it will take 9 of them to make 1/4 of this plate. The point of this wedge is that we can make longer wedges so we can make bigger plates, and we want this large medallion size behind us. These different tools are fun to play with, so when you see things like this, get you a pattern and a tool and see what you can do with it. But we're going to cut our wedges with this. We're going to put strip sets together and then cut our wedges from that, and I'll show you the trick to that next. One other thing about this quilt, I put a little fun in it. I wanted to have something that had something different than we've done before and show you a different technique. I made my medallion, and instead of turning under the edge or making the points as we have in the past, I have used chenille and just sewn it on the outside edge, and I made this chenille right here. I have chenille stars. You just draw the star on there and then sew them chenille on the line, and it's going to fluff up beautifully. You can take your brush and fluff it up and then run it through the washer and dryer, and it looks great. This chenille in the center, the white, that is chenille that I bought, and I want to show you the difference. This one is ready to go, so you don't have to stop and make it. This one you have to cut bias pieces of it, so it takes a little bit longer, but you can customize it to the colors of your quilt. We're going to use some bought chenille today. I have red, white, and blue, and we're going to do something patriotic today. The fabrics that I have chosen today to be a patriotic quilt, I have this nice bright blue. It's not a really bright blue, it's more of a patriotic blue to me. I have this one fabric, it's a print, and I use it in a lot of things. I'm about out of it, but it's got reds and blues and khakis and whites, and it's just really nice to blend in with things. Then, of course, we have to have our red to go with our red, white, and blue. And then we need a fourth color, which is a slight print with little red and blue flowers on it. And so we're going to use this to break it up a little bit. We may use this for our background circle, or we may use something else. We'll put it on there and see how we like it before we choose our background fabric. The chenille I'm talking about is bought chenille. It comes in packages. It's a roll, just like thin tape, only it's bias chenille. And you sew it down right down the center stitching line, and you can put it more than one layer and it fluffs up just beautifully. So this will be really easy for us to use. And we're ready to start cutting. I've come in real close on this medallion so that I can show you how we're going to cut our strips. We're going to sew strips of our 4 colors together. We're going to cut our wedges, and we're going to use every wedge that we cut. One of them will go this way, and your next wedge will go this way. One has the yellow, which is wide. The next one has the yellow, which is narrow. This way we don't have to cut 2 separate types of strips. We can get it all from one. The other thing I want to tell you is that when you cut these, we want our first fabric to be a finished 4 inches. The next one will be a finished 2. The next one a finished 1. Now all those are even numbers, right? So the next one's going to be a finished 3.5. That way when we flip them, none of these seams will have to match. We're going to match the inside and the outside, but the rest of it we just sew together and we don't have to worry about that. So let's start cutting for our strips now. The first fabric we're going to deal with is our blue. Now we want a finished 4-inch strip on our medallion. So we're going to cut 4.5-inch strips. We're going to need 2 of those. Now we have to square up our fabric before we can cut. We're going to take the selvage, which is the part with the writing or the holes, whatever it was connected to the machinery with. Get them even at the top and hold them up and see if they hang straight. And I have a little wrinkle here in my way, but I think they're straight. If there's any blousiness, you need to slide them left or right. I want to put the fabric down with the selvages at the top and finger press this fabric as I go down. Bring the bottom up to where it is the same distance from the top. I leave about 1 inch. I want to see those back pieces and make sure I'm not above them. Now, we want to cut off just a little bit to square it up before we start cutting our strips. So I'm going to get a line on my ruler, and you use your ruler to the best, how it suits you the best. And get a line even with the bottom here. And then make sure all 4 edges are sticking out here. And I'm just about off the camera there. All 4 edges should be sticking out, and we're going to cut them off. Now, hold your ruler where it won't slide. Don't shove it out of the way. You're pushing so hard. And when you cut, get on your mat and come to the left and tap, and you'll know you're not on your ruler. If you get on your ruler accidentally, you can come across your fingers, and we don't want to have to slow up our quilting with an emergency room visit. Now, we're going to start from this end here and cut 2 strips that are 4.5 inches. So make sure it's even with what used to be the bottom is now the top. So make sure your ruler is the same distance across there, and that the 4.5 line is on your left. There's 1 strip and 2 strips. And now I'll put this to the side for a possible border or something later. So we have the 4.5 strips, which are our blue. We'll take our next fabric and get the strips from it. I have my strip sets cut. These are a cut 4.5, 2.5, 1.5, and 4. They're going to wind up 4, 2, 1, and 3.5 when we're done. We're going to sew them together in this order. We should have 2 strip sets. We have 2 of each one of these. I start out with my strips in the order that I want to sew them together. I want them to look like this when I get them sewn into strip sets. I have my other set up here in the same order, so I will make sure I do them correctly. I'm going to take my red khaki fabric and turn it over onto my blue. I want to sew this seam right here. I'm going to get the top edges and the right edge even. And I'm going to sew it at what is a scant 1/4 inch on my machine. Now watch the right side where it's supposed to ride across for your scant 1/4 inch and make sure that stays correct. We're going to sew as far as we can and then get it even again. So that little area, come down here, get the right edges even again. And we will keep doing this until we're all the way down this strip. Okay, I'm at the end of those 2 strips that I was sewing. I'm going to take my white print and my red. It was blue, khaki print, red, white print. So I'm going to take the red and the white print, and I always put the right fabric over the left one, so my white will go over my red. And I sew the seam nearest the sewing machine when I do it that way. So it keeps me from sewing the wrong sides together. Now I'm not going to stop and cut my thread. I'm at the end of that fabric set. I'm going to continue chaining these other 2 strips together. And we'll do this until we get all the strip sets together. We are ready to iron our strips. We want to take the strip, and the way I do it is I place it on my ironing board, and I want to iron these toward the blue. All of them are eventually going to go toward the blue. So I want the blue on the top. Whichever strip you want the seam to go towards should be on the top. Now I'm going to take my nice steam iron, and I'm going to set the seam. If you don't set this seam, you can wind up not getting a good opening there. You could have a pleat there, and we don't want to do that. So we want to set our seam. See if my iron will get good and hot. And then bump it open. Okay, so we have these two done. And we want them to be blue, khaki print, red, white print. This will be our finished strip set. So if these were all sewn together and they were aimed toward the blue, this one would have to be toward the red. So we're going to iron the seam on this set toward the red. This one should be easier. That's a smaller strip. Set it, bump it open, pull it down, always set it, bump it open again, and we'll continue this till we get them all done. We have our blue, our khaki print, our red, and our white in the correct order. We want to flip the right strip set onto the left strip set and sew the seam on the side toward the sewing machine. Okay, we have all of our strips sewn together. I'm getting tangled up in them here. Remember we said we wanted all of our seams to go toward the blue fabric. If we do that, the blue fabric has to be on top. So as long as I can see the blue, I know they're all going to be aimed in that direction. So we have our strip set ready. I'll iron the other one, and then we'll get ready to cut our wedges. Okay, we have our strip set here. I have my wedge ruler on the strip set. I want to get the nose of my ruler even with the top of my strips. And I want to get the bottom of my ruler, excuse me, squared up to the strips. There are little lines. Find a seam line and even it up there. Now I've got one awkward waist cut. We're going to throw that away. And then we will cut our first wedge. So there's wedge number 1. Flip your ruler upside down and do wedge number 2. And this looks a little off square, so I'm going to straighten it up here. I don't know, it looks pretty good. Wedge number 2. Now this is how they were in the strip set. But we're going to turn all our wedges in the same direction. So now we've got a pattern going on. We'll cut number 3. We need 36 of these. That's why we had to do 2 strip sets. So I'll continue cutting these until I have 36. And I like to go ahead and put them in place just so I can see what's going to happen with them. Here are 9 of my strips. You can see the pattern as it zigzags back and forth. Your red goes back and forth. The seams don't meet, so it gives it a lot of activity. I'll get the other ones done, and then we'll start sewing them together. Our next step is going to be to get our wedges sewn together so we have a circle. And the way I do this is I take the light one and put it on the dark one. Start with the nose end, the narrow end. Put the light one on the dark one, and I'm talking about the center section. Get the top edge and the right edge even. Put it under your presser foot. Hold your threads down and start sewing. Now there is nothing to match on this except the other end. So go on down to the other end. When you get a couple of stitches, leave your needle down. Go to the other end, get these edges even, the bottom and the edge, and just slightly put a little tension on it to make sure they're going to come out right. With your other hand, make sure the edges stay even. Now your seams should not meet. We've offset them for a reason. Got the first two done. Always keep the same color on the bottom or you'll get them in a direction that we can't use. And we should have 18 pairs. And then we'll sew those together until we have 9 pairs. We'll keep sewing them together until we have one circle, one medallion. Okay, we should have 18 pairs of wedge sections, 2 of them in each. We want to take each one and just like before, set that seam. Then don't stretch it, but just bump it open. Now, it doesn't matter which way you're going to iron the seam, but they'll all go in the same way. I like to put the wider part of my wedge at the right. So there's one. Steam it. Bump it open. And we're going to get all these opened up. And then we're going to take them and turn them on each other and sew the next seam together. And we'll keep doing this until we get it all together. Our medallion is complete except for the center here. We need to make, I think I'll choose the red. I'm going to cut a circle a little bit larger than this and sew it down onto this medallion. We're going to cover it with something else so we don't have to worry about the raw edges too much. But we'll choose a color and make us a circle that large, a little bit larger, and hook it there, and that'll cover up the center. We have our medallion now. It is all pressed. We know what size the hole needs to be. I took a measurement and figured out what line to use on this circle ruler. It's a little bit hard to see, but you can fold your fabric and then cut the size circle you need. So I have cut one out of the red fabric, the size that I will need. To get this on here, I'm going to take a little bit of fabric glue stick. It's just a glue stick made for fabric. And I'm going to run it around the edge just enough to stick it. Now this gets messy, so don't get it all over yourself and all over the quilt. But just around the outside edge is all we need. And we're going to hold it in place while we stitch it on. So let me see if I can turn loose of that. And now try to center it. See how much is showing on either side. I'll go that way a little bit. That way a little bit. Now, I think that's got it. If you will pick it up and look at it through the light, you can usually tell how much is around it. We want to make sure that we've got it there good and that all of it is about centered. So now we're going to take a zigzag stitch and just stitch this in place, raw edged, because we're going to put something else over the top. We're ready to take our medallion and stitch this red circle to the center. I have changed to a red thread that will match the top. It doesn't have to match exactly, but we want it to match a little bit. You can either use a slight zigzag or straight stitch because we're going to have something else over this. I have taken my bias tape and I have cut a piece longer than this circle is around, longer than the circumference of the circle, of the red, the white, and the blue. Now I'm going to stack them one on top of each other as closely as I can make it perfect. And when I start stitching at one end, I'm going to keep these directly on top of each other as I stitch right down the center, going around the outside edge of the circle that we have on our medallion. When I get to the other end, I'm just going to butt it up to the beginning, cut it off, make sure it's stitched down good, and cut it off. You will not be able to see where we've connected it when we're done if we do it correctly. So we'll get ready and sew this on next. I have my machine reset back to a straight stitch with a tight stitch. I left my red thread in that I had changed to sew on this medallion because I'm going to layer mine blue, white, and then red. I want the red on the top with the blue on the bottom. Now start a little bit before your chenille. Just a hair before. We want to make sure we catch it down good. Go down, bring that bottom thread up like we always do. Just make a habit of that, and it makes the back a lot neater. Now we want to make sure we're sewing down the center of this chenille. I'm going to take a couple of little stitches and make sure I've got them all. Okay, I think I'm into them. Now the trick is to look underneath and make sure that you're on the edge of the circle and sew down the center of the chenille. It's a little thicker, so you have to kind of get it started. Okay, always leave your needle down when you adjust anything. Just do a little bit, stop, twirl your medallion around, get it lined up, red on top in the center. Make sure we stay on the edge of that circle that we had under there. And just sew little bits until we get done. And I'll get on around this and then come back and show you how to fluff it up. This is what's called a chenille brush. It's a short-handled little, very stiff, bristled, looks like a big toothbrush, but it's a chenille brush, and it's made to fluff this up. But it fluffs better. It does great in the washer and dryer, but if you will just spritz your chenille a little bit, and then just kind of work it back and forth, it's going to start to fluff and look really nice. So I'm going to work on this for just a few minutes, and then I'll be back and show you how it looks. Chenille. It will fluff a little bit better in the washer and dryer, but you get the general effect of it. It's going to finish off our circle very nicely. We didn't have to turn under a hem or anything, and so it's going to frame that circle there. Because this next ring right here has some khaki in it, I want to bring that out in my outside piece, and so I have found a piece of fabric with those shades in it that has some texture to it, and I think it will look really nice in the quilt. I have taken a piece of fabric which is 45 inches wide, and I have cut it about 47 inches long to give me a little space. I ironed it so that I could make sure I found the center right, and then I folded it in half long ways and then ironed it and folded the other way and ironed it so I would have that center point. I then lined up the lines on the center of my medallion with those creases and pinned it in place so that I can now sew this to the back piece. I have my medallion zigzagged to the background here. I'm going to put some more chenille like this, only a couple more layers. I want this one out here to be fuller, and I'm just going to sew it right around the outside edge, and we'll have the center of this quilt complete. I have the chenille all around. The next step is to square up. We need the same amount on either side, and we want it to come out to 43 inches because we're going to put 2.5 inch blocks around it, and we have to have 43 to have our extra half inch for the seams. We'll get there in a minute. But to do that, I took this and laid it on a large table, and I put my tape measure. First I made sure my medallion was centered, and it was. Then I put my tape measure at the bottom of the fabric and centered it to where the 43 inches was what I needed. Anything to the left of the tape measure I snipped and tore off, and anything from the 43 line to the right I snipped at 43 and tore off. It's not hard to figure out. You just snip it and then tear it, and it will tear along the thread grain. To get the other two ends, I measured in the center, made sure how much I needed on either side, and it was 7.5 inches. So I marked 7.5 inches above and below and made sure that was 43 inches, and it was. Then I snipped. I took that center and snipped it at that mark and tore it to the one side and then to the other side, and did the same at the bottom. That is one way that you can square up a large piece of fabric. It's not exact, but it's close enough for what we're going to do. The other thing I want to tell you is this piece of fabric is also behind the medallion. Now that we have sewn the medallion down securely, if you want to trim that off of the back side, you can do that, and it will lighten up your quilt top. So now we're ready to start cutting blocks for our first little border. We're ready to put our first little border on here. This border is made up of 2.5 inch finished squares. So we're going to cut strips 3 inches wide. We need a couple of each color. And we're going to put them into strip sets and then cut our blocks. So we need 3 inch wide strips of each fabric. I have cut that, and we're ready to stitch our strips together. I have the quilt ready with the first border. Keep your blocks in the order that you sew them together. The blue, the khaki print, the red, and the white. It is 43 inches wide, which will take 4 sets of the 4-block strip set plus 1. So take that navy off of that next strip and add it on the end, and then when you do the sides, you're going to use the other 3 blocks from that strip set to start going in the other direction, and it maintains the pattern. We have one more border to get on, so let's get busy. It's time to get our borders on. I have taken my fabric for my borders, and I have cut strips, enough strips to go all the way around it, the width that I wanted. I have cut the selvages off, and then I seamed them together into one long piece. I will cut the borders from this as I need it. Now we need to find out how long to make the first border. We're going to measure from side to side. Write that down, 48 inches. Measure again, 48 inches. I will cut 2 pieces 48 inches long. I will seam one to the top and one to the bottom. Now I'm going to pin it to each end and stretch the quilt out with the border to make sure I get it evenly distributed so that we won't have any gathers, and it will come out right at the ends. And we've done this in previous shows, so I'll get the top and bottom borders on now. After I got the top and bottom borders on, I measured from top to bottom to get the length for the side borders, and I cut them the same way and put them on. I added another border on the outside edge. I wanted to bring this print out, and so I have the 2 borders out here after this pieced one. I drew stars with a blue wash-out pen. I just traced around a star and then put some of my chenille on it. You cut small sections that fit each point of the star and just sew it on and butt them up against each other, and they fluff really nicely. So I have my quilt like I want it now. I'm ready for the 4th of July. Until I see you again, happy quilting.